You've seen cowboys trade bullets, but have you ever wondered what Hollywood tried to hide behind the tumbleweeds? When the Western went off the rails in the late 60s and 70s, it got so bloody, so brutal, so jaw-droppingly wild that censors went into panic mode. This wasn't your granddad's shootout. This was violence so raw, entire scenes vanished, movies got pulled, and the legends got even bigger. Are you ready to face the West they didn't want you to see? Keep your eyes peeled, because the stories you're about to hear aren't for the faint of heart. He burned the whole rule book and dared everyone to follow. Soldier Blue, 1970. If you thought The Wild Bunch was rough, Soldier Blue made even hardened critics squirm in their seats. This was the Western as a wake-up call, ripping the curtain back on American history with scenes so intense people reportedly left the theater in shock. The climax? A massacre based on a real-life atrocity, filmed with such relentless graphic force that entire countries demanded edits or outright bans. What sets Soldier Blue apart isn't just the blood and guts, it's the way it weaponizes violence as a kind of protest. The movie shoves your face into the ugliness, making sure you feel every gunshot, every scream, every bit of horror that Hollywood usually sweeps under the rug. Its message is loud and messy. This is what really happened on the frontier, and if you can't handle it, maybe you shouldn't look away. Censors were absolutely not amused. American prints were trimmed. British censors nearly banned it, and in other countries, the finale was sliced to ribbons. The debate raged on. Was Soldier Blue a gutsy statement, or just an exploitation flick wearing a political mask? Even now, you can feel the tension crackling off the screen. Either way, one thing's for sure. After Soldier Blue, Westerns could never go back to playing it safe. A Town Called Bastard, 1971. Imagine a Western so violent and chaotic that the studio had to practically reassemble it with duct tape before anyone dared release it in the States. Welcome to A Town Called Bastard, where the only law is brutality and the body count is high enough to make even the toughest outlaw blink. Shot in Spain with British money and American stars, this film was supposed to be a gritty, stylish tale of greed and revenge. Instead, it turned into a splatterfest of whippings, hangings, and shootouts, all stitched together with a plot you'll need a map to follow. When the first audiences saw it, the reaction was instant. Too much. Way too much. The violence wasn't just frequent, it was in your face and relentless, crossing every line the censors thought they'd drawn. Executions, lynch mobs, and a parade of creative deaths, every trick in the book delivered with a sneer. U.S. distributors hacked away at the film, chopping out chunks to make it pass for an R rating, but it still felt like a punch in the gut. The title itself was a problem, so in some markets, the movie became A Town Called Hell, but changing the name couldn't soften the blow. If you ever want to see what happens when a Western goes feral and the censors are left picking up the pieces, this is the film that wrote the manual. Hanny Calder, 1971. You want a Western with an edge? Hanny Calder is where that razor slices deep. Raquel Welch ditches the glamour to play a woman out for revenge, and the violence is personal, ugly, and unforgettable. This isn't about quick-draw duels or stoic heroes, it's about raw, desperate payback. Welch's Hanny gets trained by a gunslinger, then carves her way through the West, hunting down the trio of outlaws who destroyed her life. Every encounter is soaked in tension, and when the bullets start flying, nobody is safe. Censors on both sides of the Atlantic took one look at this and reached for the red pen. Scenes were cut for being too graphic, especially the ones that lingered on pain and humiliation. Some states even tried to pull the movie from drive-ins, claiming it was a bad influence. But here's the thing, Hanny Calder is relentless because it has something to prove. It's one of the few Westerns of the era to put a woman at the center of the violence, not as a damsel, but as an avenger. The film's cruelty isn't for shock value. It's the engine that drives the story, making Hanny's journey all the more powerful. Even trimmed, it's still a hard punch. If you ever wondered what a Western looks like when it stops caring about the rules, this is your answer. The Hunting Party, 1971. Now let's talk about a Western that made even tough guy actors squirm, The Hunting Party. Gene Hackman leads a posse of wealthy landowners, but there's nothing noble about what follows. Instead, it's a rampage of cruelty that turns the screen red. The film's notorious centerpiece? An early machine gun that turns men into hamburger meat in seconds. There's no heroics, just relentless, clinical slaughter. Censors in America were horrified. Whole sequences vanished just to dodge an X rating, but what remained was still brutal enough to shock audiences. The violence here is mean. It's not just gunfights, it's punishment, humiliation, and cold-blooded extermination. No wonder critics called it one of the nastiest Westerns ever made. Even the cast later admitted they were disturbed by what they saw on set. British and American censors both went to work, trimming down the worst excesses, but no amount of editing could erase the film's reputation. What sets The Hunting Party apart is its total lack of sentimentality. There's no frontier justice, just a bleak, nihilistic hunt that leaves everyone worse off. It's the kind of film you watch once and never forget, not because you loved it, but because it's proof that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the West wasn't the gunslinger, it was the person holding the camera. The Last Hard Men, 1976. If you think the golden age of Westerns ended in the 60s, The Last Hard Men is here to drag you back into the dirt. Starring Charlton Heston and James Coburn, this film ditches nostalgia for pure, pulpy brutality. Heston plays a grizzled former lawman, while Coburn is the vengeful outlaw with a personal score to settle. But forget the dusty saloons and shootouts at high noon. What you get instead is a gritty, sun-baked manhunt packed with some of the roughest, nastiest set pieces the genre ever dared put on screen. The violence in The Last Hard Men isn't flashy or stylized. It's drawn out, sweaty, and leaves scars you can almost feel through the TV. There's a notorious scene that had audiences squirming and censors reaching for the scissors, as well as fistfights that turn ugly, gunshots that echo long after the smoke clears, and a sense of relentless menace that never lets up. When TV networks eventually aired the movie, whole sequences were chopped out, leaving the plot a patchwork, but somehow making it feel even more intense. What's wild is that the film doesn't care if you like its heroes or its villains. It just keeps the pressure on, scene after scene, daring you to look away. This isn't the Old West you see on postcards. It's the West you only talk about in whispers. And when the final credits roll, you'll realize why the censors almost wished they'd left it buried in the desert. Chaus Land, 1972. If Charles Bronson ever looked at you the way he does in Chaus Land, you'd probably turn and run for the border. In this relentless revenge tale, Bronson plays a half-Apache drifter who's hunted by a posse of angry townsmen after a deadly encounter. What follows is a descent into raw survival, where the beautiful landscapes become a killing ground and every man is just a heartbeat away from being next. But it's not the story that made censors sweat, it's the way the violence unfolds. The film doesn't blink. It lingers on every wound, every desperate gasp, every moment of terror as Bronson methodically turns the tables on his pursuers. There's no clean-cut heroics here. Instead, the West feels like a place where justice and revenge have bled together, and every action has a price paid in pain. British censors hacked away at the film, and American TV versions got the razor treatment too, especially when things got especially ugly. The tension never lets up, and some of the scenes, especially when the posse's own cruelty backfires, are so intense you can almost smell the fear. Bronson barely speaks, but his performance is like a coiled spring, all energy, no mercy. By the end, Chaus Land has transformed from a simple pursuit story into a parable about the cost of hate. The violence isn't just action, it's consequence. And the censors? They knew audiences would feel every second of it. Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, 1974. If you want to know just how far a Western can go off the deep end, look no further than Sam Peckinpah's Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia. This isn't a movie, it's a fever dream in gunpowder, sweat, and desperation. Peckinpah, never a stranger to controversy, cooked up a story so bloody and uncompromising that studios nearly left it on the cutting room floor. Warren Oates plays Benny, a down-and-out piano player who sets out to claim a bounty that's as grisly as the film's reputation. The violence is personal, grotesque, and at times darkly absurd. Heads literally roll. Gunshots tear bodies apart, and the line between vengeance and insanity gets blurrier with every mile. There's nothing heroic here, just a man getting chewed up by the deal he thought he could control. Censors in America wanted cuts. Foreign markets tried to ban it. Audiences either staggered out of the theater or sat there in stunned silence, not sure if what they'd just seen was genius or just pure madness. The film's brutality isn't just for shock, it's part of Peckinpah's vision of a world so broken that violence is the only language anyone understands. But here's the kicker. Decades later, the film has a cult following. People talk about it like a ghost story, the kind of movie you only watch with the lights off and your finger on the remote, just in case. If you ever wondered where the Western's dark side lives, Alfredo Garcia's head is the map. The Revengers, 1972. The Revengers isn't just a Western, it's a howling, revenge-soaked journey into the heart of darkness. William Holden stars as John Benedict, a rancher whose entire family is wiped out in a single afternoon by a gang of marauders. What starts as grief quickly turns into obsession, and Benedict rounds up a crew of outcasts, including convicts and killers, to hunt down the men responsible. The violence here is relentless. There are ambushes in the wilderness, knife fights that leave scars, and gun battles where nobody comes out clean. Censors were particularly rattled by the rawness, scenes of characters suffering, wounds shown in excruciating detail, and a sense of desperation that feels almost suffocating. American theaters demanded edits, while the British Board of Film Classification hacked away at some of the film's roughest moments. Even so, what made it to the screen was enough to disturb audiences and give the film a nasty reputation. What makes The Revengers stand out is its commitment to showing the price of vengeance. Benedict and his men aren't noble. They're damaged, haunted, and often just as dangerous as the outlaws they pursue. The film doesn't flinch from showing the toll the violence takes on everyone involved. It's an ugly, unforgettable ride, the kind that leaves you wondering if revenge ever really settles the score, or just adds more bodies to the pile. No wonder the censors nearly lost their nerve. Lawman, 1971. If you think Westerns are all about good guys in white hats, Lawman will knock that myth straight off its horse. Burt Lancaster plays Jared Maddox, a marshal who rides into town with a simple mission: bring in the men responsible for a killing. But this isn't a story about right versus wrong, it's about how justice, when pushed to the edge, can look a lot like vengeance. The violence in Lawman is as cold as a desert morning. Shootouts erupt without warning, bodies drop, and every bullet feels like it carries a moral weight. Censors flagged one sequence in particular, a shotgun blast into a crowd that left theaters buzzing and TV networks scrambling to trim it down. Even outside the gunplay, there's a slow-burning intensity that keeps the audience on edge. What sets Lawman apart is its refusal to play favorites. Maddox isn't here to make friends or serve up easy answers. He's driven, relentless, and sometimes just as dangerous as the outlaws he's chasing. The film's ending leaves no one unscathed, challenging viewers to decide for themselves who, if anyone, deserves to walk away. For censors, it was a nightmare. Too much blood for a family-friendly cut, too much grit for comfort. But for anyone who wants to see how far the Western could push into the gray areas, Lawman is a shot straight to the heart of the genre's old code. The Great Northfield, Minnesota Raid, 1972. When a movie kicks off with the infamous James Younger gang planning one of the wildest bank jobs in American history, you know things are about to get messy. But the Great Northfield, Minnesota Raid doesn't just show the chaos, it makes you feel every wild, bloody second of it. Cliff Robertson stars as Cole Younger, while Robert Duvall plays Jesse James with a ferocity that leaves no room for old-fashioned legend. Forget the mythic outlaws of yesteryear. These guys are desperate, unpredictable, and always ready for a fight. What rattled the censors wasn't just the body count. It was the way violence happened, sudden, awkward, often horrifying. The infamous raid on Northfield unspools in a hail of gunfire, with townsfolk and outlaws both dropping left and right. There's no hero's welcome, just carnage and panic. One moment you're watching a tense standoff, the next there's blood splashed across the windows and bodies on the ground. It's ugly, it's real, and it's miles away from the sanitized gunfights of TV's Cowboy Hour. Universal was pushed to cut some of the roughest scenes, trying to make the movie fit the era's shaky comfort zone. Even then, critics called it one of the most unflinching and violent studio westerns of the decade. Today, it stands as a reminder that the West wasn't just wild, it was downright ruthless. For anyone looking to see the truth behind the tall tales, this film is a bullet-riddled wake-up call. The Deadly Trackers, 1973. No Western wears its mean streak on its sleeve quite like the Deadly Trackers. Richard Harris is a small-town sheriff whose entire life explodes in a flash of violence, sending him on a collision course with a band of outlaws led by the chilling Rod Taylor. What makes this one stand out isn't just the violence itself, but the sense of desperation that hangs over every scene. Harris's sheriff isn't chasing justice, he's chasing revenge, and he's willing to get his hands dirty doing it. The violence is both personal and public. There are shootouts in crowded streets, brutal hand-to-hand fights, and moments of punishment that go well past the usual code of the West. At times, you wonder who's actually the more dangerous, Harris's haunted lawman or the gang he's after. Censors hacked away at the film for TV, slicing out whole sequences that showed characters suffering or the aftermath of gunplay in grim, unblinking detail. The Deadly Trackers is not for the faint of heart. The story unfolds like a fever dream where morality and law have packed up and left town. There's no easy redemption, no crowd-pleasing justice, just loss, obsession, and a trail of bodies left in the dust. It's the kind of movie that makes you realize sometimes the real villain in a Western isn't the outlaw. It's what vengeance does to a man's soul. Doc, 1971. Forget everything you think you know about Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday. Doc rips the mythology right out from under the OK Corral and drags it through the mud. This isn't the West of dime novels and tall tales, it's a world of drifters, cynics, and hard choices. Stacy Keach's Doc Holliday is sick, bitter, and dangerous, while Harris Yulin's Wyatt Earp is less hero than conflicted survivor, barely keeping the wheels from coming off. The film's violence doesn't come with a wink or a nod, it hits hard and leaves bruises. The legendary gunfight at the OK Corral, it's staged not as a heroic last stand, but as a bloody, chaotic disaster. Men fall, not in slow-motion glory, but in quick, ugly spurts. The aftermath is even rougher, with the survivors broken and bitter. Censors on both sides of the Atlantic ordered edits, uncomfortable with just how much the film lingers on the cost of violence, physically and emotionally. What makes Doc so striking is its refusal to romanticize anything. No one walks away clean, and every bullet seems to dig up more pain than resolution. If you ever wanted to see the Old West stripped bare, Doc is the movie that does it, with a shot of whiskey and a side of reality. The censors tried to dull the sting, but Doc still comes at you with both barrels. McCabe and Mrs Miller, 1971. Some Westerns put their violence front and center. McCabe and Mrs Miller slips it under your skin. Robert Altman's revisionist classic doesn't flood the screen with shootouts. Instead, it builds a slow, icy dread that pays off in one of the bleakest, most realistic finales ever filmed. Warren Beatty stars as McCabe, a gambler with more nerve than luck, while Julie Christie's Mrs. Miller sees the world for what it is, cruel, indifferent, and never fair. When violence erupts in the final act, it's not stylized or heroic. It's sudden, messy, and often clumsy, just like real life. Altman stages the snowbound showdown like a documentary, following McCabe through alleyways and across rooftops as bodies drop in the cold. TV networks demanded edits for broadcast, cutting away from the worst of the carnage. But the sense of dread remains. There's no swelling music, no glory, just the muffled sound of snow and the final lonely gasp of a dream gone sour. What made censors nervous wasn't just the violence itself, but the way Altman refuses to give audiences an escape. The film holds up a mirror to the genre, stripping away the glamour and leaving behind only the struggle to survive. If you want to see a Western that will stick with you long after the credits, this is the one. Censored or not, McCabe and Mrs. Miller hits like a cold wind. The Hired Hand, 1971. Don't let the gentle title fool you. The Hired Hand is a Western that cuts deep. Peter Fonda directs and stars as Harry, a drifter who returns home after years on the trail, hoping to rebuild what he lost. What follows isn't a feel-good reunion. It's a raw, slow-burn story about regret, payback, and what it takes to survive in a world that's always ready to push you off your horse. The violence here is spare, but when it comes, it lands like a thunderclap. Fonda doesn't stylize the pain or gloss over the aftermath. Gunshots don't come with neat exits. People bleed, cry, and beg for mercy. The film's rawness led to trouble with censors, who trimmed scenes for both television and some international markets, worried about just how much the movie lingers on suffering and consequence. What makes The Hired Hand so unforgettable is how it pulls you into the character's struggle. It's not about good versus evil. It's about ordinary people making choices that spiral out of control. By the time the final confrontation arrives, you're left with the sense that every decision, every moment of violence, will echo for years. For the censors, that was almost too real, but for fans of the genre, it's a shot of honesty the Western had never seen before. So there you have it, 15 Westerns that blew past the line, left the censors sweating, and proved the Wild West was even wilder than the myths. These weren't just movies, they were battlefields, daring you to look closer and question what Hollywood was willing to show. Which one left you rattled? Which outlaw flick did we miss? Drop your wildest pick in the comments, hit subscribe, and share this with someone who thinks they've seen it all. The real frontier? It's still out there, waiting for its next legend.